good evening for those who are in the UK, and morning, afternoon, wherever else you are. Welcome to Radical Anthropology Group. Today we are having a session where I'm to introduce myself first before I introduce the session itself. My name is Malvika Gupta. I'm doing a DPhil at the Department of International Development at the University of Oxford. And today we have a special kind of session where we have three speakers, including myself. We'll be discussing the issue of Indigenous education and looking at the politics of Indigenous education in India and Ecuador. India, where I'm from, and Ecuador is a country where I do research and etc. Felix and I, along with a lot of colleagues in India from Orissa, Chhattisgarh, and Jharkhand, have been working on the issue of Indigenous education for about 6 to 7 years now. I did my MPhil research on this topic, and I also presented at RAG last year, maybe it was last term or the term before that, on this whole issue of education, where I basically talked about the sort of story of assimilation in the context of Indigenous education in India, at least, where in a sense, actors have changed over time, starting from missionaries to the national state itself, and then the Hindutva, Hindu fundamentalist groups in India who have been sort of doing a process of assimilation of Indigenous children into the national society. And the latest entrant to the story are the extractive industries, which I'll talk about later. So I'll hand over to Felix now to begin.
So, greetings everybody, and especially to Julio. I'm just going to summarize the work that we've done in the last few years, because we've already spoken twice on the Radical Anthropology Group meetings. So some of you will be familiar with the work, some not, I guess. And as Malvika said, we're in quite a remote location in the mountains, so the weather's very windy outside. If it disconnects, we'll hopefully be back very soon. If not, until we are back, maybe you'll have to invite Jakku, but I hope that will not happen. So I'm going to go quite quickly just through what's happened in the last few months. That we call this talk the politics of Indigenous education, because in India especially, there's a huge lack of self-determination of Indigenous groups over their education. And Ecuador for us is a shining example of how it's beginning to come out, thanks to Jakku's work and other people. So especially in our focus has been these mega schools. So especially one called KISS, Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences in Orissa, the world's biggest boarding school, has over 25,000 children in one school. Now, to cut a long story short, the World Anthropology Congress is something that happens every 5 years. And at the last meeting in Brazil, it was arranged to hold the next one in KISS in India. And to us and to many other people, this seemed an outrage, that because there are clear parallels between the kind of residential schools happening in India and the history of such residential schools in North America and other places. So an American anthropologist called Christine Finan had written several articles praising KISS as an anthropologist, and one of them was in the journal Sapiens. So some of you will have seen our article together in Sapiens a few months ago, where we confronted her work and we spelt out how the parallel is there with the North America model. And we also confronted the idea that the World Anthropology Congress could possibly happen in KISS. So at the same time, a petition was circulated by Indigenous people in India, and the International Union of Anthropological and Ethnological Sciences that runs the World Anthropology Congress actually cancelled KISS as a venue. So we felt this was quite an achievement. During this whole process, the head of KISS actually wrote to Malvika at Oxford University, copied to many functionaries of the university, threatening her with a legal case for defamation, because KISS is not used to being criticized. It's been behind the scenes, many people have criticized, but very few people in India have dared to take on it exerts a lot of political clout in India. So ours was the first big critique of it. So that's to summarize this whole issue and the link with anthropology. So the reasons why Indian anthropology wanted, or many Indian anthropologists wanted, the World Anthropology Congress to happen in KISS is a whole other story we can go into later. Meanwhile, so our article in Sapiens has had quite an impact. And then a few weeks ago, we published another article in The Hindu, which is one of the main daily English language newspapers in India. And in this article, we were basically drawing many more people in India's attention to the whole issue of residential school, because in India, unlike, say, Canada or Latin America, it just has not been raised, the issue of residential schools. Many people are just think, well, they're being given an education for free at KISS. How lovely of KISS, without seeing that the extractive industries, the mining companies, are funding this education. And in a way, that's how we came to the concept of extraction education that Malvika will talk about. So also in the Hindu article, we put the focus on a couple of tribal schools in central India, in Madhya Pradesh, one in a rural area, one in the city for displaced Adivasis. And we bring these as an example of democratic schooling that draws on Paulo Freire's work and the idea of critical pedagogy. So this article in the Hindu has also had we've had a lot of positive feedback from it. I think I'm going to stop there for now, because I'm keen to get onto Malvika introducing Julia, because basically in India, we are very inspired by what's happening in Ecuador and other countries. So that's the short version of the talk. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Felix. Will you please let me know 10 minutes, because I don't have a.
I will do that, yes.
Okay, so with that introduction, I'll straight away go into talking about the idea of extraction education. Apologies to those who didn't join the last few sessions and are coming in now, because I think we are both, Felix and I are assuming that a lot of people are familiar with this issue already, but we'll take up questions in the discussion and sort of have a more informal chat about it then. But right now, just focusing on the idea of extraction education, in terms of the role of extractive industries in providing in education to indigenous children in India, there are a couple of models that one can sort of see, which I outlined in my last presentation, and I'll just sort of run through that quickly now. One sort of model is where you have the state mining company, like the National Mineral Development Corporation in India, running its own schools in the state of Chhattisgarh in central India. The second model is where you have private mining companies like Vedanta and Adani running their own schools, Vedanta in Orissa, Adani in Chhattisgarh, and other places. The third model would be where you have a private school like KISS, Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences, which, apart from other sources of funding, gets its money from the state mining company and private companies like Vedanta and Adani, and also runs schools in partnership with these private mining companies. For instance, KISS has a school in collaboration with Adani in Mayurbhanj district of Orissa. That's the third one. And the fourth one is the idea where you have the extractivist state itself, as in the case of Ecuador, especially at the time when Rafael Correa was the president for 10 years. So he sort of came to the presidency with the idea of socialism of the 21st century as a post-extractivist, with a post-extractivism discourse. But what he was essentially doing was what a lot of scholars have called neo-extractivism. And the idea was that you promote extractivism and you have your discourse is to increase mining royalties to then increase spending on education. And in that process, he closed down a lot of small schools and opened up these large scale, again, the similar model as India, of centralized large scale schools called Escuelas del Milenio, or Millennium schools. And the fifth model, which kind of is similar to the Ecuadorian extractivist state model, is where the Indian government set up something called made some amendments in the Mining Act and set up something called district mineral funds. So the idea is again that you do more extraction and you put money in these funds, which is then used to set up schools in Adivasi areas. So those are the kind of 4 or 5 models where we see extraction education happening. Now, the idea of extraction education itself, and as extraction education as a concept, I borrow from Judith Walker's work, who is at UBC in Canada, and she's written a paper about where she sort of coins this term in the context of education initiatives in British Columbia in relation to the LNG industry there. And one sees, and reading that, I found that it was very relevant for what was going on in India and Ecuador and presumably in many other parts of the global south. So she explains extraction education as in 3 ways, where you see education for extraction, you see education through extraction, and you see education as extraction. And I'll briefly kind of talk about each of these. So when we talk about education for extraction, what we are essentially saying is that you re-engineer the education system to meet the needs of extractive economies, right? And all these extractive industries use the discourse of equity, justice, and indigenous rights in the name of running these schools and taking children away from their families and putting them in these kind of centralized institutions. And we see an example of this in KISS's own discourse of promoting itself as a school which turns tax consumers into taxpayers. And you see this kind of model run with the help of a large infrastructure of NGOs in India who basically deliver smart education using a lot of heavy digital technology. And now when that's happening, I think there are 2 points to note. One of them is that in the use of this kind of, in this heavy reliance on digital technology, the indigenous forms of knowledge, of making sense of the world, of knowing, doing, feeling, and integrating all of this completely don't find a space. The second aspect, problematic aspect of this is the technology itself is constituted by the.
Does Jakku want to intervene?
My suggestion is, while nothing else is happening, Jakku might as well tell us about the
introduce
in
himself.
Ecuador. Jakku, do you want to speak?
Okay. Oh, well, I don't have any problems to talk. I would just, I have some slides to give my presentation. So I don't know if Malvika can handle it.
Can I just
one
ask,
of you and then
are you? I was told you would be in the middle of a big march in Ecuador at the moment. As currently, there's a big march happening. Is that true?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, yes, it is actually.
And you want to tell us about the march to start with? What is this march?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you to Malvika and all of you guys to give me this, this chance to talk to you. My name is Jakku Yukilema. I'm from Ecuador. I was glad to meet Malvika when she was here doing her thesis in Ecuador, and she came to the indigenous movement in Ecuador. CONAI, CONAI is this one of the largest organizations from indigenous people here in Ecuador. There are some couple more organizations, but CONAI is the largest one, right? And we have this chance to meet each other with Malvika, and since there we have this relationship where we can share many thoughts and feelings as well about like education, and especially about indigenous education. Talking about this huge march that we're having right now in Ecuador, we have February 7th these general or national elections. The indigenous movement had a one presidential candidate, Jakku, and we are feeling that there was a fraud, on this last election, and that's why from every province, every town on the country is mobilizing to Quito right now to demonstrate that we are not okay with it. That there is this national board of elections where all this fraud it's been implemented, and so that's the way that we demonstrate that we're not okay with this fraud that we felt that it was committed. So yeah, and so that's why we have this huge march now. Actually, right now is people are going to this. We call it CNE, which will be like election national organization or department. We'd say like that, to show it, right? Because the difference between our candidate and the second one, who was already decided, let's say declared as the second winner, it's around like 30,000 votes, and so that's why we feel that we have a chance still by this national strike to maybe pursue this national election department to, I don't know how you call this in English, but we say in Spanish reconteo, which means like to open all the votes again, and we will count once again, because we feel that we will,
So recount.
Things like that. It's a recount, recount. And so yeah, that's the thing, and this is a historical moment for us, because I think on this post colonial era in Ecuador, we didn't have the chance to be on this public power, and now we have it. I think, and even if we lose this chance to go to the second round and on this election, it still would be a huge advance, because now we have on this on the Congress, we have like 27 members now, or senators, you can say, and we haven't had such amount of senators in our history. Yeah, we had like around 4 and 5 like every 4 years, but now we have 27, which is amazing. And now even we lose this presidential election, we think that we can do a very good job on the Congress and try to reforms many legislation that is in favor of the establishment, right? And so, yeah, I mean, that's what I can tell you right now, and about like what's going on right now in Ecuador about this politics, and especially linked to what is indigenous movement.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant. I think we've got Felix and Malvika back again. Is that true? Are you there, Felix, Malvika? Malvika, are you there? Have you come up on that mountain of yours?
Thank God we're back, yes.
Okay, right. Now we've had a wonderful talk from Ecuador. So that part of the evening's been done.
Okay. Was Jakku able to share his presentation?
Well,
No.
not the actual PowerPoint, but you've got a PowerPoint, and my feeling is it'd be good to have that now.
Wait, I just wanna say that I was invited to give a brief presentation about Amauta University, and I think we have to share like where is this idea and action come from, right? And in that sense, Malvika, if you can pass them the slide.
Yeah.
In this sense, I would like to introduce to you about I mean this, let's say, like philosophical framework of this university proposal, right? First of all, we use this concept of paradigm. What it means by that is like, let's say, like in the way the individual perceives, which will be irrational, and also understands, which will be more like rational, of the reality and how you react to it, which means like in every region of the world, somehow, people have this rational and irrational way, this own irrational and rational way to live it, right? It typically, I think for bio scholars and academics, they have divided like between Western and East paradigm. But from our point of view, we say that from America, or we call it Abya Yala, we have our own paradigm. And that's why here I would like to explain some of these, let's say, first of all, like these three main questions that I think every human being, we ask ourselves in order to have, let's say, an harmonic existential living on this planet. So can you pass the next slide, Malvika, please?
Yes.
All right. So I think every human being is wondering about like where this reality exists or not, right? I think the West is very clear and say, yes, of course, the reality exists. What we say is yes, but there is one condition here. We say, as a Native American, that yeah, there is a reality here, but exists when you have an interconnection, when you are interconnected to other beings. What we mean by a being is not just human being, but also can be like animals, could be plants, could be even like a divine being, right? For instance, monks, right? Who are connected to one idea. The thing is like here, everything makes sense as a reality when you are interconnected, not just connected, but interconnected. That means like you go forward and back, right? I think that's a difference, I would say, like between the West and what is this Native American philosophical framework, first of all. And then you go to the second question about like whether you can know this reality. And we say, yes, you can know this reality. And then you come on to the third question is how you can know this reality. What we say is you experience, you reflect about this experience, and you can know this reality. Which means, let's say, as a doctor, right? You take, let's say, a flu, right? Even yourself experience this flu, you start to treat this illness yourself as well. And from it, reflecting about like, let's say like experimenting yourself and other humans as well, you got a knowledge there. But these two actions, experience and reflecting, goes at the same time. We don't separate each other. Yeah, that's why, for instance, we call it yachak in Ecuador. To be a yachak takes like several years of studying and practicing as well, because there is not ending process of this way of living. And that might be a bit difference, between the West and also what we think it's our way of living. There is this idea of like you think and then you exist, right? But here is your experience, you reflect, and then you got the knowledge about you got to know this reality. Now, this Abya Yala paradigm also has some like four, let's say, like fundaments. One is like everything works as a whole. That means like plants, animals, minerals, planets, constellations, all the solar system, everything as a whole. And even some of our yachaks, they talk about like this multi-universe, right? Because there is not like one unique, even though we all live like as a whole, there's like, let's say, like many whole, right? The second fundament, let's say, it's like everything is alive. You know, sometimes all this will drive to what is actually life, right? Because sometimes we understand life as the one who can breathe, or someone who has emotions, or things like that. And this way of living, everything on this planet is alive. That's the second fundament. The third one is like everything is connected. Yeah, we as a human depend on animals depend on plants, on vegetables. These plants depends, of course, on earth, you know, and you can find like millions of links between the beings and on this planet. That's why we say that everything is interconnected, you know, this way of like going forward and back, you know. And finally, we say everything, there is an infinite diversity here. For instance, now that we have this coronavirus here, this pandemic on the planet, for us, it's not surprised that now we have a new coronavirus. I think that there's a second generation already about this coronavirus, even though we have this cure now, but there's gonna be more. And for us, there's no surprise. It's very logical that it's gonna happen like that, because in every single being that we have on this planet, we found diversity. Yeah, in every being. And so these fundamentals for us makes a difference between the other paradigms on the world, right? And just to share something, we believe that there depends on the region of the earth, there is like a unique paradigm. Let's say in Africa, let's say in the East, let's say Middle East, for instance, which makes this civilization unique and apart from the Western and or the East paradigm. I thought we thought that it's necessary to share this these logical beliefs, you know, in order that you guys will understand where this idea of this university comes from, right? And so now I think we can go to the next slide, Malvika.
Yes.
Just to mention something here, actually, you know, the word university has been even criticized by our indigenous scholars, let's say like this, because there is no one, you know, there's not uni, but there is like pluri-university, which means more like diverse thoughts and feelings in order to build a knowledge in every space of, that we have, you know. But we're going to use this word, this concept of university, in order to we will understand each other. To talk about the university, as Malvika and was mentioning about like the context of indigenous education in Latin America, and specifically about Ecuador. In the 90s, our indigenous movement had this, let's say, like this golden era, where for us, you know, Pachacutic, these cycles that we have, like these large cycles that we have in our existence, and it started this, let's say like this good Pachacutic, yeah, which means where our native cultures will start to arise, you know, to the every dimensions of the society. In the 90s, our historical leaders thought that political fight is going to be a main thing in the 90s. And actually it was like that. We, like the huge national strikes, we start to increase our rights into politics and also social dimension and other aspects also of the society. But on the on 2000, at the beginning of 2000, they start to think that, okay, so now that we kind of, we are more visible on the political space, it was necessary to start to work about, let's say, more this epistemological fight, because they thought, okay, so in the 90s, many indigenous leaders start to be involved on politics, being like local public managers, and we call it like local government, something like that. But there's 3 dimensions of local government, but in these 3 levels, they were already running some kind of local governments, right? And that was fine, but the thing was they start to understand that even if one indigenous will run in these local governments, they will still doing the same thing, There was kind of no difference, on the deep sense between when indigenous is running the local government and not the indigenous is running this local government. So in this sense, in the early 2000s, they start to have this idea that we need a indigenous university, because even though we knew that, or they knew that, we need to, get into school and university and stuff, but the university was, let's say, brainwashing, our children and our young people. And so this idea of university starts on these early 20s. And so, of course, the public power wasn't okay with this idea. So that's why we didn't have this budget getting from the state. And so they have this idea to create a private university. And it started as a private university, was running for around 10 years, until Korea came into power. And indigenous movement with Korea had some issues, because historically indigenous movement in Ecuador has been against the establishment, political, economical, and so on, right? And with Korea wasn't different. And so in 2013, more or less, Korea closed the university based on that the university was running very bad in terms of academic indicators, also on management indicators, and so on. And which would say in some sense was true, really was true, if you see it from this traditional way of seeing how should be run a university, right? However, we didn't thought that it was that way, but finally Korea has this a huge amount of power, public power on that time. So it was really easy to him to close the university. Later we can talk more details about what really happened, but just to give you a brief resume about what happened that time. And then it was closed until 2018. And what happened in 2018, I think we have a new government, also from this party of Rafael Correa. We have Lenin Moreno, who came on 2017 into power. But Lenin Moreno somehow was going apart with, say, like from this Correa era, right? And indigenous movement saw an opportunity here, and we have this conversation with the government. And there was many issues, because into indigenous movement agenda, we have like several topics. One of them are education, of course. And among these conversations or arrangements, we say like this, we have this idea to reopen the university, but not as a private university, but as a public university. But not just a public university, but also a public communitarian university, which I will try to explain later. And so in 2018, we reopened the university, and since there until now, we're trying to institutionalize this university, which probably or likely are gonna be open in the next 2 months, more or less, right? So it takes like two years already to establish this university. Okay, just to give you a context about this, how has been, this fight to, let's say, to operate this idea of a different sense of the university, right? And so in that sense, I would like to explain what means for in terms of let's say institutional sense, what it means community, what it means also this public communitarian regime, in which we call it as a fundament of this university proposal. First of all, what is community? We understand community as a network of social, historical, of course, because that's the way we recognize as a native people here, and also cosmical relationships living together, which means that community, it doesn't just mean just human beings, but also going beyond that. As explained before, community also can be between humans and animals, or animals with plants, and so on. When we talk about like this public and communitarian regime, we as an indigenous movement try to establish on this legal framework in Ecuador. Typically, you have this private sector, you have this public sector, and we try to open this communitarian sector on the legal framework, which would mean in Ecuador, for instance, intercultural bilingual education, intercultural health system. In terms of water management, for instance, we have this communitarian management of which basically means communities itself managing their water, right? I mean, how to distribute and so on. And so it's been really a long process, but slowly we try to open this third sector. Of course, we don't want to, like many politicians and scholars says in Ecuador, a ghetto, right? We don't want to be a state within other state, but we want to have this autonomous and way of living, but interconnected, of course, with Ecuador. In that sense, what we propose on this university is this public communitarian regime, right? Which basically means it's an institution created under and for the general, benefit of this plurinational state. That means like everyone is welcome in this university. It doesn't matter whether it's indigenous or not, right? And also, this institution is arranged and managed based on this communitarian regime, right? And that's it within this philosophical and legal framework of this indigenous nation rights. Meaning, this legal framework, we already have, we have many international law or legislation that let's say, strengthen or encourage indigenous movements all over the world to have their own institutions, first of all. And our constitution, Ecuadorian constitution, also promotes, this kind of rights. And we say philosophical because the structure of the university, the way of teaching in the university, the profile of the people, the authorities, the students, all the people, all the members of the university have to respond a way of living. And this way of living would be this Abya Yala paradigm. So that's why I was explaining what we mean. And here we try to, from this more abstract way of seeing, to try to implement on more practical, or let's say more like, more practical issues, as like institutionalizing a university with this kind of way of thinking, right? Can we go to the next one, Malvika? So, in that sense, for instance, what we want from the students, we hope that at the end of this of being like 4 or 5 years in the university, they will be communitarian people, person, which means being part of any community. As I explained already, we just the reality exists just because we're communitarian, we're interconnected with other beings. Otherwise, we don't exist. And so for us, it's very important that the students which will be at the university will understand this concept of being communitarian, cooperative. I think there is many other synonyms of this word. We use communitarian. Also wise. What we mean by being wise, not be more like abstract. We mean wise. Let's put one example. Usually, a doctor, for instance, and the classical universities are encouraged to be apart from the feelings of the patient, right? And this university, we encourage to be connected with the patient, emotionally talking, because we understand that this is the fundament of this essence, of healing that person. In that sense, I would like to share to you guys what has happened also on this coronavirus time here in Ecuador. Many people from the, let's say like this, from the cities, which are mainly non-indigenous, it has been, they got infected and they go to the hospital, and then you have like 20, 30 people, in the one room alone with many nurses and doctors, even they let's say rejecting, to have some contact with the patient because they were afraid that they will be infected as well, and so on. While we had also people infected on our communities, but our approach was different. Of course, we didn't have all these modern treatment, like, and all the medicines that you have, but we have some herbs, and mainly, or I would say, like, the main thing that we do also is to visit that person. We make them laugh, we make them to remember some nice thoughts, even cry. But the thing is, like, these infected people in our communities, almost every day was visit from someone. And we understand that this, let's say, spontaneous and even isolated issue or action has a huge impact on how this person will or is being healed. And so that's what we mean by being wise, right? Like it says here, seekers of the rational truth to any problem, but with empathy and sensibility of the other beings. So basically, wise people will be to recognize the value of the rational thought, but also of the irrational thought. For us, both thoughts are very important for our existence. And the third quality, let's say like this, that we would like that our students will cultivate, will have, it's been entrepreneurs, or let's say the spring. And many, and now that I was sharing to you guys about this march, right? About we have this indigenous candidate running for president, sorry. Many confuse us with the left, parties or with the left ideology, let's say like this. And sometimes we also are a bit confused because we know that we are not very on this way of state controlling our lives. We know that we need some kind of, interconnection or some kind of link, between all of us here in Ecuador, but not on the way that typically leftist parties or leftist ideology, let's say like this, are thinking, like the government, the super institution who is going through many aspects of our private life. Definitely, and sometimes and now, for instance, that we kind of going into propose some public policies are going on this way to promote the young to be more free and on economical terms as well. And sometimes there are some politicians are saying that indigenous movements are from the right ideology and not from the left ideology. But for us, it's very important to give to the people that they will be independent, of course, and then they will have these tools and means to have their own living let's say resource, right? And this, so we understood that this third quality also is very, very important. And so if we go to the next one, Malvika.
Yeah, just to say that if you can finish in 5 minutes, and then we'll have half an hour for questions. If you can just maybe go over the carreras and what kind of teachers, but kind of a bit quickly. Yeah?
All right.
Okay.
And so finally, I mean, how you operate this kind of, all these, let's say like romantic ideas, right? First of all, in the legal sense, I think,
Oh, sorry.
On the legal sense, we understand that it's very important to have this public framework, but also this communitarian favor into the legal system, which we are doing right now. Socially, we understand that the CONAI should be involved indirectly at the university management, which we will explain later. Also, the structure of the university should be based on the Chacana method. We will go into it later as well. The authorities and all members profile should have a communitarian experience, which will be living, in one community, meaning that community shouldn't be like just rural community or indigenous community, could be a neighborhood on the urban area as well, or one organization like social movements, for instance. All of this kind of experience also will be also communitarian, right? And native speakers. Also, we have incorporated, the Yachaks into the council members as a researchers and also as a teachers in the university. Native language is very important for us. We have proposal that the first year, 25% of the courses should be teaching on the native language. And the second year will be 50%, and in the last year you will have 100% of the courses being taught on the native language. And finally, academy, when we talk about faculties, also to have some, not just random faculties, but also organized by what we call it knowledge centers, which is based on this Chacana method that we will explain later. Just to give a brief example, because we have, I think I have 5 minutes. For instance, when we talk about like management, we can go to the next slide, Malvika.
Yeah.
Okay, there. Typically,
Yeah, can you see it? I am on the next slide.
Yeah, I can see it. Okay. Typically, you have like two consoles and on the public or private universities in Ecuador. You have this university console and you have this knowledge console. We propose a third console, which will be this communitarian console and the WISE console, which means also based on this Chacana method. What is a communitarian console? Basically, we understand that the university shouldn't be placed on, let's say, in Quito, which is the capital, but should be spread all over the Ecuador, you know, where there is mainly, let's say, indigenous population. And from this territorial or these small areas should have there should be one representative which should be into this communitarian council. The idea of this communitarian council is that they will have this voice where they will give to the university what are the needs, the basic needs that they have now, demands, would say like this, the demands that they will have at the time on this area, the specific area. About this WISE council, they will be like kind of a philosophical advisors to the university, right? They could, based on our way of living, they also has been treated as I don't know how you call it this, but it will be like kind of like disciplinary. I don't know how you call it this, but
What word are you looking for?
yeah, exactly like los que ponen disciplina, los que ponen disciplina, who will be like okay, well, we can talk later a little bit.
Yeah, I
exactly.
think my suggestion would be to explain the carreras and the cross.
Yeah, and then basically, okay, we can finish now actually. So just to say, basically, this is the way also we want to transform this management model of the university, or this alternative way of manage the university. Also makes a difference, you know, between this typical university. Here we introduce the one thing is the communitarian, which will be the opportunity to the people outside the university to have, you know, a voice into the university. And the same also with our WISE people, which usually are being to this, let's say like this, to the communities only, you know, this science will be put it as a, sometimes even as a, let's say, illogical, you know, but here in the university, they will have a space and also a voice into the university. I think these two councils somehow, we understand, will make a difference also in the university, and this university council being more a management thing, you know, how is right now in this traditional university, well, they basically have all the power to make decisions. But here now, no, you have this communitarian council and also WISE council that they will have also control of the university in terms of management. I think that's all, Malvika, and I think that also we can share, and then okay.
Okay.
I think that's all. Thank you so much.
So yes, it's open to questions, and let's just get a conversation going. And extremely sorry, of course, about all the technical glitches. Let's make most of it in the discussion.
Just to start the discussion, can I say that in a way, our talk today is about the politics of education generally and Indigenous education in particular. So the questions that Jakku has mentioned about Indigenous knowledge and bringing that to a special university, it applies to all of us in a way. What is the nature of knowledge? Are we encouraged to ask these things in our schools and universities? I want to bring it here to other cultures and to the politics and power structures in education generally. So just to start that before people, please ask questions.
Yeah.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jakku, Felix, and Malvika for the wonderful presentations. I just have a question about the alternative practices in perhaps the Indian tribes. For instance, what's happening in Ecuador, perhaps, from what I get from Jakku's presentation, is that there is a need to create an alternative university. So there is still that faith in an institutional mechanism, but it is up and against the traditional institutional mechanisms. But perhaps what's happening in our debate in, like, I come from New Delhi, perhaps what's happening in the debate in Odisha and other parts is that there is a deep skepticism against these institutional values per se. And so there is a need to go, instead of creating an oppositional institution, there is a skepticism about the institutions itself. So how do we compare these two practices in terms of the reaction of indigenous communities in India versus Ecuador in their faith in, for instance, I think Jakku mentioned that they are still hoping for a recount, as in there is still some faith in the democratic system and the legislative system of those debates haven't really occurred in the indigenous practices in India. So what kind of a relationship do we see in terms of our relationship with institutions and the alternative practices for tribes in India?
Great. Thank you, Anshul. Shall we take more questions? Maybe take one more question and then we can respond.
Darsha had a question in the chat wanting to, if Malvika could say more about education through extraction and education as extraction. Can we clarify that?
Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks a lot, Darsha. I can't see the name, but yes. Okay. Just before I start, I also wanted to share that we organized a talk last Friday with the Oxford Climate Society on the issue of extraction education, hearing indigenous perspectives from India and Ecuador. So we had two indigenous women activists from India joining us, Ruby Hembrom from Jharkhand and Soni Sori from Chhattisgarh. And we had Kati Machua from the Amazon wing of the indigenous movement in Ecuador. So I can post the link to that, and perhaps Camilla can share that with everybody after the talk, or however it's possible through RAG. Okay, coming to the questions, taking Anshul's question first, I think yeah, you're raising a very important point about yes, we can see the critique, and in terms of moving forward, how do we do it institutionally, or do we do it outside the institutions? Do we do it through the state institutions, or do we do it outside the state institutions? And I can think back to the sort of, the Constituent Assembly debates that happened in India, and the discussion we had in the previous RAC talks, where you're Elvin, one of the main issues in India with regard to the Adivasi question is that India decided to follow a policy of integration, leaving aside the paradigm of isolation and assimilation, but choosing the middle path of integration, but that never happened. And the recent Khaka report actually says that what India has done in the name of integration, the Indian state has done in the name of integration, is assimilation. And I think for me, that idea of integration is quite important. And I think it's something we can reclaim and think through, which is something which has not happened. And for instance, Verrier Elvin said that in one of his reports in the late 1950s or 60s, he says that we need not see, schools need not see indigenous institutions of learning and teaching as rivals, but we could work well, and we could find a real path of integration if we saw them as allies. And I think he himself wrote a book about the Ghotul amongst the Muryas, and there are many such institutions across Adivasi communities in India. There's the Dhumkuriya, there's Dangri Basa amongst the Dongriya. So I think one of the ways forward, in my view, is to kind of really think about integration and find ways of putting these different forms of knowledge and epistemologies in dialogue with each other. And to just go back to what's happened in Ecuador, I mean, Ecuador changed its constitution in 2008 to call itself an intercultural and plurinational state. I think Jakku would have talked about it when we were off. An intercultural and plurinational state, and it was the first one to also recognize rights of nature in its constitution. What has happened with that is another story. But the idea of, I think, again, for me, a bit like integration, the ideas of interculturality and plurinationalism and interculturality especially is very important, because this project of Amauta Evasi, if you look at the history, it started in 2000 as a private university by the indigenous movement, as Jakku shared with us, and it was shut down by the state, by Korea. And then the indigenous movement's demand was to reopen it, but reopen it as a state university, which means that they really wanted to find ways of translating into practice the idea of interculturality and interculturalize the state in not just in letter but in spirit. And the whole project of Amauta Evasi is a step towards that, as a brief answer. And the second question is by Darshia, I think. So just to finish my extraction through education and extraction as education. The idea of extraction through education, in very simple words, is that you basically you kind of repurpose funds from where the state was initially putting money into, which was the small village community neighborhood schools. You sort of you extract money away from that and you put it into other projects, like large scale residential schools and complex clusters. And that's exactly what we see in the new education policy. So that's the idea of education through extraction. I'm just checking if there's anything else. And you see something similar in Ecuador, where, as I said before, that money was taken away from the intercultural bilingual education system, which was institutionalized in 1980s after a long, hard-won struggle of the indigenous movement over decades. So it was finally institutionalized in 1988. It has its faults. And now with the Correa project, the idea was to take money away from that and open Escuelas del Milenio, which are these big kind of schools, and parallel projects of Ciudades del Milenio, Millennium Cities in the Amazon. And the third one is education as extraction, which is actually looking at what's happening within the sphere of education itself, epistemologically, pedagogically. So one can sort of understand the idea of education as extraction in conversation with Paulo Freire's idea of banking model of education, where the idea is that you basically, you're working with children from indigenous communities, especially, are backward, poor, primitive. So it's completely overridden by a deficit poverty discourse, who need to be taught, who need to be educated them, and extract a skilled and educated individual. And here you again also see a hierarchy which is kind of put in place between mental labor and manual labor, which is similar to the hierarchy between skills and knowledge. So, you skill them, and India has many programs of, with the Modi government, especially, we've had many programs of national skill development, etc., where you're training Adivasi youth, you're skilling them, you're kind of first de-skilling them through these schools, then you're skilling them to become ready workers, and you're also skilling them in gender stereotypical ways. So yeah, that's more questions, please. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I would like to share something about this relationship that I think indigenous organizations should have with the institutions. Well, from our experience, I think indigenous movements should have a relationship with the states. Of course, the states itself, they have their own way to work, to perceive the reality, let's say like this, right? We call it here in Ecuador, this public sector, right? But which is very important as well in this relationship is to have this sense of what we are, you know, on this legal frame. The way of our living also has these all aspects or dimensions that you have in this public sector. Or most of them, I'm sorry, most of them. And so all of these communitarian institutions, let's say like this, legally talking, we call it communitarian. And so for us, if we get into relationship with the state, it's very important to have this conscience that we, as indigenous movement, we have our own institutions, our own way of do things, you know, in every aspect of our life. So that's why not every time, but most of the time, when we have this interrelationship with the state, that we try to put into the legislation this word of communitarian. I'm just gonna give this a brief example, you know, how it works. For instance, when we talk about education, you know, this public institution, they have this national level, regional level, and then you have this district take, this public sense, you know, of doing education. We as indigenous movement, we also should have, you know, these levels, you know, national, regional, and district levels. Of course, for our way of doing education doesn't work. We have this national level, and then we have this local level. So we skip this all, you know, we skip this regional level because it doesn't make sense for us. Of course, for the states also very much, right? And the district level, they are very small for us. So basically, this communitarian work into the legislation, you know, allows us to have our own kind of way of organizing our education into the legal framework. So that's why I think, of course, like sometimes many people are also skeptical of have this relationship with the state, and they say, you know, we have to do our own thing and stuff, blah, blah, blah. But I think what we know from our experience, when you got into when you have this relationship with the state, you win and you lose, and that's life. That's like actually how life works, and we say that this really makes sense. Really makes sense. Like the university, what happened right now? You know, when we were a private university, we didn't have basically money to run the university. We always, you know, have to you know, ask the NGOs and many other international organizations for money. But now we have money, right? Of course, that's what we win right now. What we have lost is sometimes in terms of pedagogy. How you call it this? Pedagogy.
Pedagogy, yeah.
Yeah, pedagogy. And in that sense, we're losing. We know that. We know that because before, when we were a private university, we have more power, you know, to handle things in this way. Now that we're a public university, we have less power to do it, you know. But I think it's just to have this this way of seeing things, you know, and not just, I mean, there's many gray between and black and white. So that's all. That's all I wanted to share.
Great, thanks, Jakku. Yeah, I mean, really, thanks a lot, because, you know, I mean, I think what Jakku is sharing with us is the reality, and I think that's what anthropology really creates a space for understanding the messiness, and not just trying to sort of straitjacket reality into boxes, but seeing reality as it is, messy. So yeah, thanks for that.
But please, more questions, because we've cut short.
Hi, I have a question.
Good.
Hi. So my PhD proposal is the lost role of the feminine for looking for sustainable solutions. So looking at indigenous pre-Abrahamic societies. And I'm really curious with everything that you've been saying in that patriarchal structure of disassociation from the connectivity to the earth, and how we've allowed a commoditization of natural resources, where you see the role of the feminine. And of course, I don't mean gender, I mean the role of the feminine connection and protection and balance of the earth and the resources.
Great, thank you. That's a great question. Any other questions, and then we can take them together in the interest of time.
Can I just say, yeah, I didn't feel at all comfortable myself with the structure of the university, with the rector and the vice rector and and the disciplinary procedures and stuff. I mean, I see that you know there's huge pressures to have a relationship with the state, and there's huge pressure to form a university which mirrors the universities of the state. And I can see that it can be argued that it's realistic to mirror the state in the way it does things. But I don't think the planet has any future on that basis. I don't even think the planet has any future if we have such a thing as states. To me, states are intrinsically patriarchal, intrinsically violent, intrinsically divisive. And the program, if we are to follow genuine science, and by science I mean genuinely accountable knowledge. Peer reviewing is not at the end of it, but it's part of it, but genuinely accountable, collectivist, if you like, peer review, but above all, internationalist science is telling us we're burning up the planet quite quickly, and we need bottom-up singing, dancing, connectedness of the kinds that everybody knows that we used to have as hunter-gatherers, where we learned singing and bonding and dancing. And unless we somehow get back to the methods of knowledge that made us human in the first place, we're lost. And I'm not at all, I didn't feel at all comfortable with the models. I mean, especially because Indigenous knowledge works when it's linked directly with Indigenous practice. You can't take the knowledge and then live under a capitalist system with money and all the conflicts and all the national and local hierarchical forms of loyalties. And the knowledge itself will rot. The knowledge itself will become abstract. It will turn into the kind of things that when I was a kid, I had to put up with as a boy when I was taught by nuns and priests who themselves said all is one and all one is all and did all this stuff. To me, we're in danger of losing what really makes us human. And those are things like singing, dancing, laughter, joy, but above all, rebellion against any authority whatsoever, which is coming from on high somewhere.
I think that's a lovely answer, at least a provisional answer to Ilana's question. Can we move on, because many people have not spoken and I'm sure many people have something to share.
Hi, I'm Tam in Glasgow. I'm tuning in from. Thank you very much. A really interesting talk in all sorts of ways. What Jakku said in general of the sort of philosophy behind it seemed to tie into me with what William Blake said, that everything that lives is holy. But I was seeing that not just the connectedness, but the interconnectedness. I was really interested in that. What it reminded me of that's going on in Scotland just now, and it's in a much smaller way, but this extraction, education, interaction that's going on, that there are a lot of fish farms have developed on the west coast of Scotland, on the islands. And these are the sort of indigenous people, the Gaelic-speaking people on these islands. And these fish farms that are almost, I think it's about 90% owned by just about one Norwegian billionaire, have been making all sorts of forays into education trying to help local schools supposedly, but under the basis of giving themselves good PR, but also to get the kids warmed up to work in there, because there's not many jobs in these islands now, and the Scottish government has the intention of doubling these fish farms that are salmon as well. And they've got this Frankenstein fish now that bears no relation really at all to the mythical salmon that came had always come back to Scotland, to the tiny little patch of river that they were born in, to lay their eggs. But it's clear that the Scottish government have no interest in that mythical salmon. Really, they're cultivating and encouraging this ecological devastation it's causing as well. But it's under the guise of education and extraction, and I'm trying to do what I can. There are people in Scotland that are fighting this, but it's just exactly an example of what Chris has been talking about.
And exactly the same as what we're seeing in India and other countries. So thanks.
Yeah,
so much.
yeah. Chile's very bad for it as well. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think Sarah wanted to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Malvika. So I'm not at all part of the anthropological community, but what I want to say is that, I mean, I'm from the UK. As I'm looking at my own life and unpicking for myself what it means to live, to have been born in London, into the middle of the city that was the center of an imperialist power that, I was so conscious has been devastating Indigenous communities. I've needed to do a lot of work, personal work, to process how I need to live. And so there's a couple of thoughts that I have, is that really in response to what you were saying, Chris, is that I think it could be amazing if, as part of your community, maybe you might find ways to structure in your gatherings some form of really dancing and singing and sharing what your different joys are, so that you can begin to bring into this community the things that are missing as a result of academizing tribal and Indigenous peoples, so that in the process that you can embody of what it means to draw on the resource of your own connections to be spiritually part of the earth, or in relationship to the tree or the wind. So there's just that feeling, and also to say that what for me is just a huge challenge in terms of living with a narrative around COVID, which I can't accept whatsoever, that there aren't really many answers for how to live with the complexity of the violence that's part of the culture that I'm living in, but that I must find a way to really look at the changes that I need to make personally. And there was just one other comment that I wanted to make to you, Jakku, in response to what I was seeing in part of your presentation, where that one of the third points that you made was that you would see that people would become entrepreneurs. And I'm not at all wanting to take away the fact that as a Western person, that other people shouldn't have a relationship to money, but just really looking at the fiat system, that it is fundamentally corrupt. It is designed to destroy, to exploit, to separate people from themselves, from each other, from the earth. And I feel personally that until I find a way myself every day to honor what I believe is possible to really respect what I know is deeply embedded in all Indigenous communities, that each person on this planet has a gift to bring to fundamentally change the trajectory of the human being.
Thanks, Sarah. Anybody else?
I also had a question. I was wondering if you are aware of the model of education in the rural India promoted by Professor Spivak, the Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak. And I wanted to share something that I just found that, so basically, from my understanding, is that she stresses on literacy and numeracy, the value of that, but how that is done. So I think she said something like how to make words rather than only learn spelling, understanding mathematical principles, not just by doing sums, how to understand what is studied rather than learn by rote. So I just wanted to ask whether that's as valuable as obviously singing and dancing.
On singing and dancing, Tam from Glasgow and a lot of us are preparing to sing to trees and do a lot of singing to trees with children in the build-up to the climate conference in Glasgow in the autumn.
Could I also mention a fantastic Vimeo, which is on the Radical Anthropology Vimeo site by the Brazilian activist Dayara Tucano, who spoke somewhat on the question of Indigenous people's relationship to mainstream education, universities, because she herself did a thesis, a dissertation in education, I believe. But she was the daughter of a shaman and had inherited and learned the shamanic songs. She was an artist who had all this shamanic knowledge, and she experienced what she called an epistemological rebellion, whereby she insisted that she be examined in part in expressing in understanding education through use of singing and dancing in her own Tucano people's styles. So yeah, I suppose our thoughts are that a real Indigenous university would be breaking away from kind of the mainstream models of education, kind of being literate necessarily, that there could be orality and so forth. But that Vimeo is available for people to watch, and I really do recommend, if you Google Dayara Tucano, I put the name and the link in the chat.
It's pretty much eight o'clock now. Malvika, I'm not sure what you want to do. We've lost about half the people now. We need to stop soon.
Yes, okay. I mean, there's an interesting conversation which has already happened between people, so I don't think I necessarily need to respond to anything. I mean, I'd actually like Jakku to respond to some of the questions, because they are about what's happening with the Amautaywasi model. But yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing the Spivak's idea of rural school. I was not aware of that, so I'd like to look into that. And I mean, there's a lot of other work people are doing in India and in Ecuador, where you take into account ideas about not just learning how to read or write, but actually making sense of the number system and what it means to know numbers, and sort of the epistemology, the sort of meta knowledge of these forms of knowledge. So I in response to, I mean, I'd just like to say that, again, it's, as I said earlier, anthropology really, this is, I think, to my mind at least, this is one of the gifts of anthropology, that as a discipline, when it is able to kind of free itself of its colonial history and so on, really allows us to listen to different viewpoints and understand them for what they are and where they're coming from, and locate them in their historical trajectories, rather than trying to to have a normative idea of how things should be. So I think, I mean, just from what I understand of what's happening in Ecuador, yes, we have the, in Latin America, yes, we have these other models, like what's happening with the Zapatistas and so on, where you have models of autonomy, sovereign communities, and so on. And I think that's what a lot of our participants today are kind of indicating towards, of moving towards that sort of an idea. And yeah, and one is very well aware of that, and I'm sure people in Ecuador also are aware of that. But I think it's the sort of historical challenge of why the indigenous movement in Ecuador has chosen the path of not running a parallel state or running just living in parallel realities, but actually to interculturalize to the rest, the non-indigenous in that sense. He didn't go into the different sort of aspects of how this university is actually based on Andean philosophy because of lack of time. But yes, if he did have time to do that and talk about the different disciplines that they offer, the different programs that they offer in the university, you would see orality has as much space as literacy. The teachers are not the ones who have got professional degrees from mainstream universities, but you have the shamans, you have the yachaks, you have the taitas, who are the teachers as much. And the idea is to build an interconnected community, including all, rather than kind of have an exclusionary group outside of the state. So just to kind of share some ideas on his behalf, and from what I understand of this, reality is very complex. We are up against extraction education in Scotland, in India, in Ecuador, everywhere. Collectively, we can sort of singing, dancing, reading, writing together, we can sort of move ahead. And that's what I want to say.
Right.
Felix probably wants to say something, and Jakku, if wants to. Yeah. Jakku, do you want to say a final word?
Yeah. Just two things. First of all, about this, I know some of you were talking about this messiness that we live right now. Well, I think, of course, this rational approach that the Western civilization has about it, I think it's necessary. That we understand very well. But I think what is missing, and that's also we understand, and that's why in the university we have this strong approach about the spirituality, right? Because for us, the spirituality and emotion are very linked. There's we are very clear about that. And also how this is going into this university way of living for our students. I think one of the keys to understand this message is emotions, treat feelings, to know about feelings and not being scared to confront them, and we know, that it's not easy to know about ourselves, basically, because that's the feelings, right? Rationally living is to observe, to know about other beings in general, but emotion is about ourselves. And so one or part of this, let's say, solutions to understand this message, it's actually on the way of feelings, emotions, right? And so that's why I wanted to share this with you, because I really understand you guys when and all those all the problems that is happening right now all over the world. And sometimes we have this frustration, let's say like this, but there is a way of living that actually not just in the shamanic way, but also in this common person way of living that we actually can cultivate and have some kind of peace on our lives, right? And that's why we say in our university we put this strong, you can say even a skill, to understand, the value of the feelings and emotions into our practical lives, right? And that's the one thing. The second thing is about this feminism movement and how we approach this feminism movement, thoughts, let's say like this, and demands into our way of living. First of all, what I hear about, like, I mean, also hear some women to say, is this mainstream, a thought of feminism movement are against our way of living, right? The mainstream, when I mean about mainstream, is this idea of, like, woman as a sex being in a public space and being dominated, let's say like this public space, which of course is not like there's nothing wrong to have this idea, but to push every woman, and every society on this way, I think that's what I hear so far. It's a wrong idea, because we understand that like women and men, and when I mean like women and men, it's not about just sex and gender, but the energy, right? And when we talk about energy, we're talking about qualities, right? Just to put an example, when we talk a man, we understand there is a competitiveness, into ourselves. And when we talk about women, we talk about like being cooperative, for instance. Yeah. And so we understand that every person in this life has these two energies into ourselves. For instance, my name Jakku, it's feminine actually, but I'm man and I have this name. Yeah, maybe that means that my feminine, let's say, energy are being dominated in my body, something like that. And so what I meant by that is not to reject this idea there is machism into indigenous culture. Of course, we know that there is this machism into our indigenous culture. We don't really know if it was heritage from the Spanish, or we had already before the Spanish came to America. Yeah, that's for sure. What we know is that some cultures into what is now Ecuador, it was more matriarchal, let's say, civilization. There was some were more patriarchal civilization, but they try also to keep this idea that we're both, men and women in one person. In that sense, I think try to harmonize, what a woman has been seeking, I think, on this modern era. I'm sorry, about like to have more rights and more public space, which, like I say, I think there's nothing wrong with that. But when you just push this, to dominate this public space, when you forget this private space, which for us is very, very, very important as well. I think that's also what I meant to say. This is just, of course, I think we take into account what the feminism movement want to say, but also what we understand is that is not the. I don't think that now, let's say like this. Yesterday was the man, and now it's the woman. No, yesterday was the man, and now there should be men and women together. That I think that's maybe explains what I wanted to say. Basically this, and yeah, finally, thank you so much to everyone, really, and I was really glad that I have this, space to share with you some ideas and thoughts and also feelings. And I hope really, I mean, all you have shared today just makes our more strong and really believe in what we're doing, and that we're not alone. I think it's necessary, and that's what we also understand, that we have many alternatives. I think Amaute proposal, it's one alternative, even in our countries in Ecuador, and there should be millions of alternatives that should appear in order to democratize all over the world the education, and to benefit all of us from it. I'm very sure there should be some benefits also, even for you guys, and we are very far away from what we're doing. Of course, we don't idealize what we're doing. We know, and I think at the time we would say that there's many wrong things with what we are doing. Like one of you says, I don't believe on a state because they have this on it. yeah, and it could be. I mean, we're gonna know that in 20, 30 years, and we're gonna fix it, because I think that's the way of living, you know, doing, fixing, doing, fixing, and that's it. And really, thank you so much to all of us. And I was really glad to be with you guys.
Thank you, Jakku. Felix, do you want to say?
No, just I think it was a very good discussion and great to have you there, Jakku, because speaking in this way, it's what the decolonializing of anthropology, it's how it can happen, where we listen to a completely different viewpoint. And it's knowledge, as you say, about oneself, about one's relationship with nature, knowledge about indigenous cultures and indigenous knowledge systems, all coming together in questioning in a much wider way, what is education?
Great, thank you. Okay, then thank you, everybody. My takeaway message, Jakku, thank you enormously. And my takeaway message is anthropology has been studying the other for a long time. I think it's time we move, we start looking inwards. That's sort of my take. Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Camilla. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Very much.
Thank you all three.
And huge apologies for all the disconnections and whatnot.
Yeah, no, it was worth it.
And
Fantastic.
next week, it's the anthropology of Shakespeare, isn't it? Is that right? Am I right on that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it is. Jacob Fischel's Anthropology of Shakespeare. It should be very exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.